us where you're live.
Good morning. It's good to be with you again this week, as we are enjoying another beautiful day outside. And I've got two beautiful young ladies in class with me this morning. So we're happy to be here, and we hope you are as well. Last week in our study of the life of Jesus, how he lived, how he walked, trying to see things through his eyes, we discussed the Samaritan woman at length. So this morning we're going to begin where we left off last week. And so we're in John chapter 4. We went at length about and talked about the woman and the fact that Jesus went out of the normal path to go to Samaria, where this woman resided, to speak to her. The normal pathway, his where he really was going, according to his own words or to the words of the narrator, was that he was on his way to Galilee. But instead of taking the normal longer roundabout route to avoid going through Samaria, he went directly through Samaria to get to Galilee. No Jew, no self-respecting Jew would ever do that. But Jesus did it with a purpose in mind. He went there to meet this woman, this particular woman. And he teaches us something in that process. He teaches that everyone matters, that everyone is important. No matter where or what their station in life is, they matter. And as he had said oftentimes, he had come to seek and to save those who were lost. And he had come to heal those who were sick. Now, I think he means more than just physical sickness when he says that. He means that he has come to heal those who are spiritually sick and in need of health, both physical and spiritual. So Jesus has come to this community, and he has met this woman, and he has impressed her with his compassion and his knowledge. And she has shared that with the community, and the community has come out to watch Jesus and to listen to him, and they have become believers. They profess themselves, not just because of what they'd heard from the woman, but because of what they had heard from Jesus. And let's just look at that. That's in John chapter 4. Beginning in verse 39. Many of the Samaritans from the town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days. And because of his words, many more became believers. They said to the woman, "We no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world." Now that's interesting, because Jews thought salvation was just for the Jews. Jesus' disciples are with him. Most of them are men who will become his apostles, or a significant number of them are men who will become his apostles. And Jesus is going to send them to the world, way beyond the boundaries of Judea and Galilee. He's going to send them into Samaria. He's going to send them into foreign countries and lands. And they need to know that he is the Savior of the world, not just of the Jews. So it's a teaching moment. And it shows us that God really does care and is compassionate about the world. Of course, we quote that scripture all the time in John chapter 3, "For God so loved the world." But most of us draw a small circle of what our world looks like. It was shocking to the Jews that God would include the Samaritans or the Gentiles into his plan of salvation. So Jesus has finished his ministry there in Galilee. He's not only has he ministered to the woman, the Samaritan woman there at the well, but he has spent 2 days with the entire community preaching and teaching to them, and they have come to realize who he is. And then it says in verse 45 again of John chapter 4, after the 2 days, he left for Galilee. Remember, that's where he was supposedly going anyway, was to Galilee. And now Jesus himself had pointed out that a prophet has no honor in his own country. When he arrived in Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him. They had seen all that he had done in Jerusalem and at the Passover feast, for they also had been there. Now remember, we're still within the early part of Jesus' ministry, what we refer to as the Galilean ministry, but it has interludes. As we have looked at in the last couple of weeks, Jesus had left from Galilee, had come to Jerusalem because of the Passover. And he had spent a few days in the countryside outside of Jerusalem. Now he has spent a few days in Samaria, but he's on his way back up to Galilee to resume his ministry in that area. There's an interesting parenthetical statement there where Jesus says that a prophet has no honor in his own country. But yet we see here it says that the Galileans welcomed him. But there will come that moment, as you and I know, where Jesus is rejected by his people. But he's made that statement. So he's already made his disciples, his apostles, aware that of this moment. Just as Jesus will oftentimes tell them that he's going to go away or that he's going to go through some type of suffering or death, and they just can't conceive of it. Well, here he's kind of giving them a forewarning that there will be rejection. So as we move on, it tells us that they had seen all that he had done. So there was a significant number of people from Galilee who had also gone to Jerusalem for the Passover feast, and they had seen the miracles that Jesus had done, and they had heard him teach. And the scripture tells us they heard that because they had also been there. Now, as we move on in John, beginning with verse 46, we're in John 4, chapter 4, verse 46. Once more, he visited Cana in Galilee. So he's on his way back up, and John tells us that he goes back to the city of Cana. Now, remember, he's been there before, and what was the purpose or what was significant? Well, it was he changed water into wine at the wedding feast. And that was the first miracle that Jesus performed. So he goes back to Cana. And there was a certain royal official whose son lay sick in Capernaum. Now, when you think about where these cities are, most of us are familiar with our East Texas geography. If you think of Houston as Jerusalem, and you go through Samaria, that's a significant country. That gets you up somewhere, probably around Livingston. If you were traveling north from us, you'd hit the mountains and the hills of Samaria. And then Jesus had gone through that. And then he comes into a small city of Nazareth, where he grew up. It appears that this time he passes by Nazareth, but then you could think of that maybe as being a smaller city along the way past Livingston, something like Diboll. And then from Diboll, that would say, let's equate that to Nazareth. He would continue on north, and he would come to another small community, and we might call that Hudson, or some community up there that's just in and around the Lufkin area. That could have been Cana. But then not too far away, he would come to a city called Capernaum. And we'll just, as far as distance is concerned, we'd say that would be about where Nacogdoches is for us as a time of travel. Now, don't get out your maps and your rulers and check me on all those exact distances. I'm just trying to give you an idea geographically where this would be and how far he would be traveling. So when Jesus bypasses Nazareth and goes into Cana, I think it has something to do with that statement that he made that a prophet does not have honor in his own country. So he goes around the city of Nazareth at the moment, and he goes into the city of Cana. While there, this Roman official who lives in Capernaum, and Capernaum, as you remember, has basically become Jesus's home base. And he is residing there now instead of in Nazareth. And Capernaum is a major city community there on the northeastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. So once more he visited Cana in Galilee, where he had turned the water into wine. And there was a certain royal official whose son lay sick at Capernaum. When this man heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he went to him and begged him to come and heal his son, who was close to death. Unless you people see miraculous signs and wonders, Jesus told him, you will never believe. So this is a royal official. It doesn't tell us whether he is an Israelite, Jewish, or whether he is a Roman. It does say that he is a royal official. So he could have been a servant of one of the procurators, one of the governors, one of the kings of the time. You know, we talk about Herod, King Herod, Agrippa the first and Agrippa the second. We talk about some of the other governors, such as Festus and Felix. So there's any number of officials that he could have been a servant of. And so there's a high possibility that this man is Jewish. But he has come to Jesus and requesting and begging Jesus to come to heal his son. Now, again, we try to look at things through Jesus's eyes. I'm not sure I can explain why Jesus reacts in the way that he does. The man has come and he's asking Jesus to come heal his son. He's pleading with him. This translation says that he has begged him to come. But Jesus talks not just to that man and his situation. He talks to his community. He talks to the community that the man comes from. He says, unless you people see miraculous signs and wonders, Jesus told him, you will never believe. I think maybe Jesus was making a challenge here. I'm trying to see through his eyes and understand why he would reply this way. This man is not deterred. Maybe Jesus is testing his faith or his desire or his honesty or his commitment. He says, unless you people see miraculous signs and wonders, Jesus told him, you will never believe. The royal official said, sir, come down before my child dies. Jesus replied, you may go, your son will live. The man took Jesus at his word. That's a statement that says that the man trusted and believed what Jesus told him. The man took Jesus at his word and departed. While he was still on the way, his servants met him with the news that his boy was living. When he inquired as to the time when his son got better, they said to him, the fever left him yesterday at the 7th hour. Then the father realized that this was the exact time at which Jesus had said to him, your son will live. So he and all his household believed. This was the second miraculous sign that Jesus performed, having come from Judea to Galilee. So sometimes it's hard to tell where these interludes take place. Here we find that this is the second sign. He's done the sign with turning the water into wine. But yet we also have these stories that are recorded in Matthew about Jesus going throughout Galilee and healing many, many people. So this one is a significant thing. This is not just a healing. It's a remote healing. It's healing someone that he's not in contact with. He doesn't lay his hands on them. He's at a significant distance from them when he speaks to the Father and says, your son will live, your son will be healed. So the scripture tells us it's his second sign. All right. Now, if we stayed in John, we would start reading, we would begin to hear of a trip back to Jerusalem. So we'll start there for just a moment, just showing you the differences in some of our narrations of our different gospels. Sometime later, now this is John chapter 5, verse 1. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for a feast of the Jews. So from Galilee now, John takes us after the healing of this Roman official's or this royal official's son. He takes us back to Jerusalem. But in Matthew, we have a lot of stories about Jesus' ministry throughout Galilee that John just skips over here. He may tell some of it in some of the other passages or related passages later. But so now let's go back to Matthew. We're going to go to Matthew chapter 4. And we've been there in previous studies. So in Matthew chapter 4, we're going to look at just how that closes out and what happens in the next few chapters. In Matthew chapter 4, we know that Jesus has begun his ministry. And if you move down to verse 18, it tells us that Jesus has begun to call his disciples. Now remember, this is before he makes the trip down to Jerusalem for the first Passover. He's in the area of Capernaum. He's walking around the Sea of Galilee. He's already been introduced to many of these men in Judea, around Jerusalem, and around the Jordan River where he was baptized. He has met many of these disciples, but he has moved from there after going through his wilderness experience, and he has gone from the wilderness, probably spent a few days in Judea, Jerusalem area, and gone to Galilee where he began his Galilean ministry, and where he had gone to Canaan and he had changed the water to wine. And then we're told that he went throughout Galilee and those other areas. Well, beginning right here now in chapter 4, verse 18, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men. At once they left their nets and they followed him. So we could continue that reading, but you got the gist of it. He began calling his disciples in Galilee. Yes, there will be men he's introduced to in Judea, but where he first begins calling is in Galilee. Galilee is a very important, significant ministry. So he's called Peter and Andrew. He will call James and John. And there will be other men, I think, that are with them that are fishermen that become disciples of Jesus. Now, remember that the apostles come about later. That's a group of 12 men that are selected by Jesus. But they're selected from a larger group of men. We know that there's a group of around 70 that travel with Jesus, and he sends them out at various times to go preach and teach. But it's out of that group of 70, I believe, that he selects his 12. So we have to be careful in our thinking that when Jesus is calling disciples, that it always means an apostle. Some of them are very significant and will become apostles. So in verse 23, Jesus went throughout Galilee. Now remember, we're in Matthew chapter 4. We've been here before. We're just reiterating this before we move forward in Matthew. So he's called these these disciples from Capernaum, from the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus went, beginning in verse 23, Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. News about him spread all over Syria. Now, Syria is a larger region than Galilee and Judea. Syria it's a large region, and this area of Palestine is considered to be part of Syria. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues. Let me skip back down, verse 24. News about him spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, and those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. Large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him. So it's not just people in Galilee now who are following Jesus, but they're coming to Galilee from the whole area of Syria. You remember one of the statements that's made about people from Galilee? They thought there was no honest or honorable person could come from Galilee. You remember the statement that Nathanael made when Philip brought him to Jesus or told him about this prophet? And Nathanael said, "Can anything good come out of Galilee?" So this is an area and a region where Jesus seems to focus. It's Galilee. People from Jerusalem had a certain honor. I mean, it's almost like if you were from a Roman colony and you were a member of that colony, you were a Roman citizen, and you had a certain honor and respect that not everybody around you had. Well, in Palestine, those people who were in Judea and in Jerusalem, they had a certain honor that they didn't share or believe that the people in Galilee should have. We're guilty of that kind of stuff. I mean, we look at parts of our country and we say, well, they're from East Texas. Well, if you're from East Texas, you're proud of it. But from other parts of the country, they think that means you're backward and you're ignorant. That's how Galilee was looked at. But people are coming from all over Syria, and they are coming into Galilee to hear Jesus, and he is healing. Now, this is kind of a summary statement that we're reading right here, because we're going to read about some of these other stories. This summary statement could include what happened at Cana when he changed the water to wine. It can include the healing of this royal official servant that we just read about. It talks about demon possessions. We're going to see and hear several stories of where Jesus cast out demons at different times. And between the various gospels, the same story will be told, but from a different set of eyes, and we'll glean different aspects of it sometimes. But this is a summary statement that we just read about all these people coming and about Jesus spreading his ministry throughout the region, beginning from Galilee and out of the city there at Capernaum. All right, so we're not going to just spend much time on Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. You know what that entails, right? That's the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus has spent enough time with the community, and he's seen enough atrocity and how people treat one another, and he has a message to share with them. And he has a large crowd. Now, where did the crowd come from? From all across Syria. This is not just the people who live in Capernaum or Cana. This is a large crowd of people who come from all over Syria to be around Jesus. And he goes up on the mount, and he preaches, he teaches, he speaks to the people. Now, I don't think Jesus had this manuscript. I don't think he's reading from something that he sat down and wrote or that someone else had written. This is Jesus speaking as a man. Yes, he's God, but he is speaking as a rabbi, as a teacher. He has this large audience. And if you look at the Sermon on the Mount, and I'm only going to talk in general terms, he talks about how we should relate both to God and to man. But primarily he talks about how we are to relate to our fellow man, how we are to treat one another. He talks about things like divorce and debts and all kinds of things. But it all has to do with treating people right and being fair in our lives and lifting people up. He talks about us being salt and light. In other words, we're supposed to be examples to the world round about us. And as it begins with what we refer to as the Beatitudes. Well, why do we call them Beatitudes? Because he's saying, be like this. This is the kind of attitude you should have. And he talks about the meek and the weak. They will inherit. They may suffer in this world, but they will be rewarded. See, there's a lot to be said about sacrifice, giving up, thinking of others, putting others before yourself. Now, that's about all I want to say about chapters 5, 6, and 7, because we've heard many, many sermons and lessons over the years about the Sermon on the Mount. But Jesus is concerned with relationships. He's teaching people not to seek honor for themselves, but to treat and serve others and lift them up, and then honor will come. Respect will come. Reward will come. Maybe not in this world, but for many, it does come in this world. But it will come. Jesus has come and showed us how to live that kind of life. All right, now let's move over to Matthew chapter 8. That's where I really want to begin this next set of discussions that we're going to have this week and following. Now, in Matthew chapter 7, the closing story we have that Jesus has taught after he's done all these other things about treating, how we should treat each other and the respect that we should have for our fellow man, and other lessons as well. He talked about in verse 21, he says, not everyone, and this is the story of those who build houses on the rock and on the sand. He says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Jesus says more than one time that he must do the will of the Father. He here tells us that the people who come to him are people who must be willing to do the Father's will. He says again, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only those who do the will of my Father who is in heaven. So, as Jesus oftentimes would say to his disciples, or he said to his family, I must be about my Father's business. I must do the will of my Father. When he told his disciples about the food, they asked him, in the story of the Samaritan woman, they said, aren't you hungry? And he said, he wasn't in need of the food that they brought. His food was to do the will of his Father. See, Jesus is on a mission. Now, that doesn't mean Jesus ever didn't get hungry and he didn't need to eat, because he did. He was human. He was a man. And he often ate, and he ate with his disciples and other people who surrounded him. But it's significant and important that Jesus closes out that Sermon on the Mount by saying there is a will, there's a way that his Father wants people to live and to act and behave. And those who will enter the kingdom will be those who do the will of his Father. You remember in John chapter 3 when Nicodemus came to Jesus? I have no idea what question Nicodemus was going to ask. But he came to Jesus and he opened up with saying, we know you're a teacher come from God. Because no one could teach with the authority that you teach if he didn't come from God. And Jesus looks at Nicodemus. Again, I don't know what question Nicodemus came there for. But Jesus looked at him and said that no one could enter the kingdom of heaven unless they were born again. So here we have two statements about what it takes to enter the kingdom of heaven. One is being created anew, becoming a new person. We talked about it, turning over a leaf. All the various things we say today when we tell somebody, that I'm a changed person, I'm a new person. That old person has died. People who go through suffering and things such as addictions, they have to turn over and they have to become a different person. And it's a struggle for them. But we have to be born again. And here we understand that we have to do the will of the Father. We have to live the way Jesus, or way God the Father wants us to live. And Jesus is going to show us how to do that. He just spent, I don't know how many minutes or hours it took for him to speak that. And remember, my think so is this is all coming from the heart and the mind of Jesus. It's not scripted. Occasionally he will make reference to an Old Testament prophecy, but he doesn't have a scroll in front of him. This is knowledge that he has gained over his lifetime of study. And yes, he's inspired by the Spirit because he's filled with the Spirit. And yes, he is deity. But he sits on that mountain as a human, showing us his understanding of the will of the Father, and he shared it with them. So when he says that, a lot of what he's talking about is what he's just spoke about in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Those who enter the kingdom are the people who strive to live by the Father's will. Now move down into verse 29. And of course, if we went on and read the rest of that story, we have the story that talks about building houses upon the rock and the sand. And we teach that to our children, And so, but then in verse 29, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching because he taught as one who had authority. The same thing that Nicodemus says to him when he comes to him, at least in so many words. We know you are one who comes from God because you speak with such authority. And not as he says, because, well, let's read the verse again. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. See, one of the things that was significant about that statement, I think, is that it's not so much condemnation. Jesus is teaching how we should live. And he's teaching us that even in our limited capabilities, we don't have to do anything really great and significant. It's just live right. Treat people the way God would treat them. Respect God. And Jesus is going to show us that he honors and respects God the Father, as well as loves and respects God's creation. He truly has come to save the world. And he truly does speak with authority. And the people are beginning to see that. Now, here's where we begin, and I only have about 10 minutes left. But when Jesus comes down from the mountainside, He's going to continue on with his ministry. In verse 1 of chapter 8 of Matthew, when he came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. Where did these large crowds come from? From all across Syria. And remember, that includes Jerusalem, Judea. It includes even Samaria. Samaria is part of this. The Decapolis, other areas over on the eastern side of the Jordan have come, as well as Galilee. He's got people from all of Syria, much larger area than just Galilee and Judea. People have come and now they are following him. So when he came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus reaches out his hand and touched the man. You understand how significant that is? Now remember, before we read that parenthetical statement or that summary statement in Matthew chapter 4 about Jesus going all throughout Galilee and healing people and casting out demons and all of those things. So now we're beginning to see some of those stories that summary statement refers to. Jesus reached out his hand and he touched the man. Now, what is it that this man has? It is leprosy. Now, you've heard the stories. You know that a leper was required to announce himself as the leper. Whenever you got close to him or he got close to you, he had to call out that he was a leper because people were frightened of leprosy. It was a contagious disease. And it was a devastating disease. It probably was more than one disease that just gets named as leprosy. But this man comes to Jesus. We don't know whether he cried out before he came or not. But it says he's a leper. You can see it. Jesus knows it. The man comes to him and says, if you are willing, you can heal me. He comes to him in faith. And Jesus reaches out his hand and touches him. No Jewish rabbi would have done that. They would have kept their distance. See, there's a difference in the way Jesus speaks and lives than the way the common religious authority and leaders lived. And the people are beginning to see it. Jesus reaches out and he touches this man. He says, I am willing. And then he tells him to be clean. And then immediately he was cured of his leprosy. Then Jesus said to him, see that you don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them. So Jesus tells the man, he's basically saying, don't delay. Don't go around telling folks what's happened to you. You go immediately to the priest and make your offering. The offerings that were prescribed in the law of Moses for someone who has leprosy and who has been healed of it. Remember, he is considered to be defiled. And until he goes and presents himself as being clean of this leprosy to the priest, and he makes his offering, and then the priest will declare him to be undefiled. Now, it may take a period of weeks or days that he has to go through, kind of like we do with a quarantine. You know, there's a time period, I think, involved in that where once he goes to the priest. But this man is being able to re-enter life, normal life. For him, he's been walking dead. But now he is being able to rejoin society because Jesus has touched him. Isn't that something? Now, I'm not real sure what all this means when Jesus says, don't tell anybody. He will sometimes say that in other stories that we read. But you know what happens, right? I mean, people just can't keep it in. The news is too good. I suspect that once this man went to the priest and became clean. He probably told this story over and over many, many times. Well, we don't have a lot of time left. So we're going to read just another couple of stories here. But again, this is Jesus, the Son of God, God himself, but he's living as a man here upon the earth. And he is responding to the community and the things that he sees where he goes. And sometimes he goes to a place for a specific purpose, because it's all part of his mission, yes. But just like the story with the Samaritan woman, he went there with a purpose in mind. He sought her out. He went where he knew she would be. You and I don't have that kind of knowledge. We might know that women will come to the well to draw water, but Jesus went in a time of day when women should not have been there. And Jesus went there, I believe, looking for that particular woman, knowing that if there was an outcast in the community, this is the time of day they may come. I think Jesus had more knowledge than that. It wasn't just deduction on his part. He knew she was going to be there. So sometimes Jesus goes places with a purpose. But as he goes and people come to him, Jesus reacts to them. He heals many. He can't heal, I say he can't. He doesn't heal everybody, because not everybody gets to him. Not everybody comes to him with a request. We know that disease carried on, and there were still sick people in the region, and has been for generations. But Jesus teaches his compassion and his ability, and he is showing that his mission is to heal the sick and to seek and save the lost. And I think he's talking about a deeper sickness and a deeper lostness. He's talking about a rejoining in relationship with God the Father. And he's told us that we must become a new creature, as he told Nicodemus. And he tells us that we must be people who are willing to do the will of the Father. In verse 5, we have the story of the Roman centurion who demonstrates his faith. We'll pick up with that story next week. But you know what is kind of significant about it, right? This centurion is not a Jew. He is a Roman. And he impresses Jesus with his faith. Jesus will make a statement, I've not seen such a great faith throughout Israel. We'll begin there next week.